Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here in Vienna to present these data to you, which are from this phase 2 study of semaglutide for the treatment of obesity in people without diabetes. These are my disclosures. This study was, of course, funded by Novo Nordisk, and I do work with Novo Nordisk along with a number of other pharmaceutical companies in obesity and diabetes research. So I think everybody here will recognize that we have limited pharmacological options to help treat people with obesity, and also that the GLP-1 receptor agonists we already have one approved for the treatment of obesity, and of course they're very widely used in the treatment of type 2 diabetes. One of the most recently available GLP-1 analogues for diabetes, which is now approved in the United States and a number of other countries, is semaglutide. But so far, until now, we have not seen any data on semaglutide for weight management, for which, of course, it's not currently approved. So the aim and objectives of this study were to assess the efficacy and safety of semaglutide to promote weight loss in people with obesity who do not have diabetes. So the primary endpoint of this study is weight loss, change in body weight in percentage at week 52, and as you might expect, we look at a number of other important measures, including waist circumference, measures of glucose metabolism, and cardiovascular risk factors such as blood pressure and lipids. The primary analysis of this study uses an Ancover model with a number of factors in the model, and uses a very conservative intention to treat-based approach, which uses multiple imputation to account for missing data. And this is very important because it means that the data that you see, the way that they're modeled, are the most conservative analysis that you would do for any sort of weight loss study. So I'm now going to show you the trial design. So this was a multinational, double-blind, placebo-controlled study with also an active comparator, which is liraglutide at the dose of 3 milligrams, which is, of course, already approved for the treatment of obesity. And the study lasted 1 year. We recruited 957 people from 8 different countries, and the inclusion criteria are a BMI above 30, age more than 18 years of age, and having at least one previous attempt to lose weight. We excluded people with diabetes. As you can see, there were 9 different arms in this study. There is a placebo with both liraglutide and semaglutide doses. So these patients had to inject twice per day, once with semaglutide or placebo, and once with liraglutide or placebo. There is a liraglutide 3 milligram daily dose, and 5 different doses escalating of semaglutide. And this was given on a daily basis, and the reason for this was related to the expected pharmacokinetics. At the time when this trial was being designed, we didn't have all the information available from the phase 3 program with semaglutide in diabetes, which is, of course, given weekly. Escalation of dose was done every 4 weeks for those 5 groups. There was also 2 groups at the higher doses where there was a faster escalation of semaglutide treatment, but I'm not going to share that data with you in detail today. All of the people in the study were supported in terms of lifestyle intervention with a 500 kilocalorie deficit diet and a recommendation to increase their physical activity levels to at least 150 minutes per week. So these were the baseline characteristics of the people who took part in the study. 35% of participants were male, 73% were white, and 86% were non-Hispanic. The average age was 47 years. This was a relatively high level of obesity in this population with an average weight of 111 kilos, an average BMI of 39, and a waist circumference of 118 centimeters. I think a really important part of this trial was the work that was done by each of the centres to ensure that people remained in the trial. And you'll be aware that a lot of trials for weight management, we have a very high dropout rate. Here, we have over 80% of people in the study remained on their assigned treatment at week 52, with only 18% discontinuing treatment. Of those patients who discontinued treatment, just under 2/3 of them returned at week 52 for body weight measurement. So that means that we actually had body weight measurements of 93% of people in the study at the end of the study, which of course minimizes the problems that we often see with lost and missing data in trials of treatments for people with obesity. So let's move on now and look at the primary outcome of the study, which is changing body weight at week 52. You can see here that the group of people who were treated with diet and lifestyle achieved a 2.3% weight loss, liraglutide a 7.8% weight loss, which is completely consistent with the scale program of liraglutide for the treatment of obesity. And then there is a very nice dose response for the 5 different semaglutide groups. And I'd like to highlight particularly the 13.8% weight loss seen at the highest dose of 0.4 milligrams daily. If we look at this same information on the weight loss curves, I think the most important thing to see from this is, as you might expect, with the placebo treatment, also with the lower doses of semaglutide, patients appear to reach a plateau in body weight around about the middle of the study, whereas in those people treated with the higher doses of semaglutide, we are seeing ongoing weight loss, which continues and is still ongoing at the end of the study. Another important aspect when we're looking at treatment is to look at categorical weight loss, and what you can see here is that if we look at 5% weight loss at the higher doses, over 80% of semaglutide treated patients achieved a 5% weight loss, compared to 66% with liraglutide and 23% with placebo. Greater than 10% weight loss was achieved in over 50% at the 3 higher doses of liraglutide, compared to 34% with semaglutide, compared to 34% with liraglutide and 10% with placebo. We also, in an exploratory analysis, having seen these very impressive results, looked at the proportion of patients who achieved 15 and 20% weight loss. And here you can see between 30 and 40% of people at the higher doses achieved a weight loss of at least 15%, and we actually had 27% of participants achieving a 20% weight loss on the highest dose of semaglutide. In terms of changes in cardiovascular risk factors and glucose metabolism, we saw improvements in blood pressure, lipid profile, and also high-sensitive CRP in all the dosing groups, with no clear indication of dose dependence. But we should remember that this was a group of people who did not have diabetes, they were normotensive, and generally had well-controlled risk factors at baseline. As we see with all GLP-1 receptor agonists, we saw a modest increase in heart rate at semaglutide doses above 0.05 milligrams per day. This was also seen with liraglutide 3 milligrams, and there was no clear effect of dose. As you might expect, with a drug that has effects on glucose metabolism, there were small reductions in HbA1c, but remembering this is a group of people who had really normal HbA1c at baseline. In terms of adverse events, we saw quite a high rate of adverse event reporting, but that was also true even in the placebo group, and that's what you expect when you study people with obesity over a year. And the most striking difference here is, of course, in GI adverse events, which were much higher with all the active treatment groups, around between 70 and 80%, compared to placebo at 38%. In terms of serious adverse events, there was no clear association of the number of events with dose, and the most common GI-related adverse event was nausea. If we look at treatment discontinuation due to GI adverse events, you can see that these were generally quite low, a little bit higher with the 0.4 milligram semaglutide group, but nevertheless this was only around 10% of people in the study. In general, these discontinuations were not dose dependent. And if we look at nausea, perhaps you can see here, as you would expect, we start with the liraglutide group. You see this nausea at the beginning of the study, which tends to decline over time, and we see a very similar pattern with all of the doses of semaglutide, and also a relatively low rate of nausea, as you might expect with placebo. Very few severe events, and as I've shown you, very few events leading to withdrawal. I haven't shown you the detailed data for the fast escalation arms, but there were no consistent differences in efficacy or discontinuations, and the safety profile was similar to the slow escalation arms. So to conclude, in this study of people with obesity without type 2 diabetes, treated with semaglutide on a daily basis, or liraglutide or placebo, we had a very high retention rate in this study, and we were able to demonstrate dose-dependent weight loss, which reached 13.8% at week 52 with the highest dose of semaglutide, compared to 2.3% on placebo, up to 41% and 27% respectively, achieving a 15 and 20% weight loss with semaglutide at the highest dose, compared to, of course, much lower rates on placebo. Generally, the drug was well tolerated. There were no new safety issues, with the most common adverse event being gastrointestinal. And these data will support the further development of semaglutide as a treatment for people with obesity. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wilding. This fascinating paper is now open for discussion.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. I'm a PhD candidate from Canada. Can you please elaborate more on the lifestyle intervention that was provided to all the participants?
So everybody in the study saw dietitians on a regular basis throughout the 52 weeks of the study. They were also given advice about physical activity, but there was no supervised physical activity within the study.
Okay, so the physical activity was not supervised, and how often did they see the dietitian?
They saw the dietitian every month during the study.
And did they only see a dietitian?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so no social worker, nothing like that, no interdisciplinary team?
No, it was dietitian, and obviously the study physician would also support that advice, along with study nurses and everybody else on the team.
Okay. And do you have any idea why the 180 or so patients dropped out? Was it just because of the adverse events, or were there other reasons?
So that's an interesting question. If you look at the people who did drop out from treatment, in fact, we saw higher rates of discontinuation in the placebo group than we did in the active treatment arms. And I think I can show you that information. So if we look at treatment discontinuation, you can see that it's not dose dependent, and that the highest dropout rates were in people on placebo and on the lowest dose of semaglutide. So I suspect it was lack of weight loss was the main reason for those withdrawals, and I've already shown you the withdrawals that occurred due to GI adverse events.
Okay. And can you
Excuse me,
elaborate more?
maybe we'll give a chance to...
Oh, sure. I'll just wait then for to ask this question.
My name's Michael Horowitz. I'm from Adelaide. I'm perplexed that you assess GI symptoms by self-report, given that it's known to be highly unreliable and prone to nocebo effects rather than a validated measure. Why did you do this?
So everybody was asked specifically about adverse events at each study visit, which were regular throughout the study. You're correct that we didn't use a validated measure, but we do use the standard adverse event reporting terms that are established for all adverse events, and this has been the way that all of the GLP-1 agonists have been assessed in clinical trials, both for diabetes and for obesity.
That's not strictly true. There's some exceptions. But similarly, if you had a drug for functional dyspepsia or irritable bowel syndrome, the FDA or European authority would not register your drug. So validated measures are simply available and they should be used.
Okay, well, we'll take that advice on board, but certainly for liraglutide, which is approved for obesity treatment, this type of data collection was considered acceptable by regulatory authorities in the United States and Europe.
Okay, I'm sorry for restraints of time. We're going to have to go on. And I'd like to invite my friend and colleague, Dr. George Dicker. Thank you, Dr. Wilding.